Batman solves the Jeffrey Epstein case in a weekend. Not because he's the smartest man in the room, though he is. Because he is the one detective on Earth that money cannot buy, cannot call in a favor to make disappear. And if you do know anything about how the real Epstein case actually went, you already know why that one sentence matters more than any gadget in the cave. So here's the claim, and it's going to sound insane until I prove it. Batman doesn't crack this case with detective work. He cracks it by being unbuyable. Now stay with me till the end, because there's a wall even Batman hits. A part of this case his fists and his fortune cannot touch. And the detective who actually finishes the job is not Batman at all, it's L. I'll get there. First, let's be clear about who we're dealing with, because Batman to a lot of people means a guy in a rubber suit who punches clowns and is filthy rich. That's the merchandise. The character is something else entirely. He debuts in 1939 in a comic literally called Detective Comics. That's the job. Everything else is a costume worn over a forensic scientist. In Batman Year 1, before the suit even works right, he's already running crime scenes like a lab tech. In The Long Halloween, he spends an entire year hunting a killer who only murders on holidays, working it methodically next to Gordon and Harvey Dent, while the whole Gotham Police Department gets nowhere. In Hush, somebody builds an elaborate conspiracy for the sole purpose of destroying him, using his own rogues as chess pieces, and he still finds the one thread that unravels it all. And then there's the feat that actually matters here. In Tower of Babel, we learn Batman has quietly written contingency plans to take down every member of the Justice League. Aliens, the fastest man alive. He keeps a file on how to beat all of them, just in case. In the OMAC project, he builds a satellite network that can watch anyone on the planet. And on film, in The Dark Knight, he reconstructs a shattered bullet out of a concrete wall to lift a fingerprint off of the fragment. To this fandom, prep time is a punchline for a reason. Give this man a file and a night and the fight is basically over. But none of that is why he wins this one. The reason is almost boring. Bruce Wayne is a billionaire who cannot be bought because he already owns all of it. No bribe works, no favor lands, no phone call from someone important makes him stop. So when I say Batman closes the Epstein case in a weekend, understand I'm lowballing him to be polite. Because here's the thing nobody actually wants to say out loud about this case. The Epstein case was never unsolved. We talk about it like it's a mystery. It's not. By 2006, a detective had already solved it. The evidence existed. The witnesses existed. The whole pattern was written down in a sworn affidavit. There was no missing clue, no locked room, no cipher. The problem was never lack of evidence. The problem was that everyone who held the evidence could be reached, outlawyered, outspent, pressured, or quietly convinced that this was not a fight worth having. Sit with what that means. The bottleneck in the most infamous abuse case of the century was not detection, it was nerve, spread thin across 100 people who each had something to lose. And a case only needs one reachable person in the right chair for the whole thing to die. That's the actual case. Strip away the island and the private jet and the famous names, and what is left is a solved crime the system simply chose not to finish. Which means the detective you need isn't a smarter investigator. You need one with nothing to lose and nobody to answer to. And that one thing is Batman. March 2005. A woman walks into the Palm Beach Police Department and reports that her 14-year-old was paid for a massage at a wealthy man's mansion that became something it never should have been. I'll spare the details. This channel is about the puzzle and the system, not the suffering. The man was Jeffrey Epstein. The case lands on a detective named Joseph Rekery, and Rekery does the job right. 11 months, sworn, recorded statements, and what he documents isn't a one-off. It's a machine. Girls were paid cash, and then paid more to bring in other girls. By May 2006, and it's all in a probable cause affidavit, and Rekery is recommending multiple felonies. And here's where the case stops being about evidence and starts being about power. The state attorney takes it to a grand jury, and instead of a stack of felonies, Epstein gets charged with one count: solicitation of prostitution. As if the 14-year-old had been the other side of a business deal. The Palm Beach police chief is angry enough that he formally objects and hands the whole thing to the FBI. The feds build a real case, a 53-page draft indictment, the kind that ends a man with dying in prison, and it never gets filed, because in 2007, the U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta signs what a lot of people consider the most notorious plea deal in modern American history, a non-prosecution agreement. The federal case evaporates. Epstein pleads guilty in 2008 to 2 state charges, and he's sentenced to 18 months. He serves about 13, and he serves them on work release, driven out of the jail 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. The deal even quietly grants immunity to co-conspirators and the victims. The actual victims aren't told the deal is happening at all. A federal judge would rule years later in 2019 that hiding it from them broke the law. Julie K. Brown at the Miami Herald pulling the whole thing back into daylight in 2018, finding roughly 80 women to force the system to try again. In 2019, prosecutors in New York finally indict him for sex trafficking of minors. And that August, before any of it reaches trial, Epstein is found dead in his cell, ruled a suicide. A Justice Department investigation later calls it a cascade of negligence and misconduct by the prison, and finds no evidence of foul play. Either way, the trial never happens. The closest the system ever came to real accountability was 2 years later, when Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who helped run the recruitment, was convicted in New York and sentenced to 20 years. That's real. But it happened after Epstein was already dead, and the deal that let him walk had already protected everyone it was built to protect for more than a decade. And the receipts from all of it are sitting in the public record right now. The flight logs entered as evidence at that trial. And the receipts from all of it are sitting in public record right now. The flight logs entered as evidence at that trial. The contact book dragged into a separate federal case. Photographs of the island filed in court. We're not going to read the names off of those pages. That is not what this is. But the paper trail was never the mystery. It never was. A detective solved this in 2006, and then the system had 13 years, 2 federal districts, and a stack of sworn evidence, and it still walked this man out of a jail 6 days a week. That is the case Batman is about to open. So let's set the rules, because from here on, this is a scenario Batman isn't real. Every document, though, he's about to read is. We hand him exactly one thing, the same thing the real system had and fumbled. Detective Ricari's affidavit. Maybe 2006, not a Gotham case, not a fictional crime, the actual file in our own lives. Bruce Wayne opens it in the cave, and Alfred already knows it's gonna be a long night. Everything after this sentence is a simulation, but the evidence is the real evidence. The deal is the real deal, and the wall he hits at the end is very real. Move 1. Batman does the one thing the state of Florida could not bring itself to do. He believes a 14-year-old. Sounds small, but it's the whole case. Ricari believed her too, and it cost him, because belief without leverage just gets you out-lawyered. Batman has the leverage. He reads that affidavit, and he doesn't see a he said, she said. He sees a documented recruitment pyramid, which means every victim is also a witness, and every witness knows 2 more. The state looked at that and saw a problem. Batman looks at it and sees an organizational chart. And here's the move the real system never got to make. Nobody can call Bruce Wayne and make this go away. There's no donation, no board seat, no favor, nothing to hold over him. The single mechanism the entire real case ran on, the fact that everyone involved could be reached, does not exist against this man. Move 2. Follow the money. Because Batman is the only detective in this genre who thinks like the villain's accountant. The real investigation treated Epstein like a predator with a jet. Batman treats him like what the affidavit actually describes, an operation. Not one crime, a system. Girls paid to recruit other girls. The same structure documented over and over, running for years. This is where the Bat computer stops being a toy. Bruce Wayne owns banks. He looks at Epstein's own fortune, the mansions, the plane, the island, and he asks the question the state never forced. How do you build and pay for a machine like this? Out in the open for years. He can trace the accounts. He can map the properties. He can see the whole structure Epstein stood up to keep it running. That's a thread the real case barely pulled. And Batman pulls it anyway, because he can afford to, and because he's the only investigator with no reason to stop. That's the point. You strip it down, this was never just a one man with an appetite. It was an organized operation with real infrastructure, and seizing that infrastructure is exactly what Batman was built to do. And remember that part, because this is the part he actually wins. Now we're gonna pause for a quick second. If you're still here, you already know this channel doesn't get the algorithm's help for free. A like or subscribe is the entire reason the next case gets made. Alright, back to the cave. Move 3. Surveillance. In the comics, this man builds a system that watches and an entire planet. Point a sliver of that at one network, and the secrecy that protected everyone becomes the exact thing that hangs them. The island stops being a rumor. The flights stop being deniable. The pattern is just on a screen in a cave. In front of a man you cannot subpoena, cannot gag, and cannot fire. Move 4. Now this is the one that separates Batman from every prosecutor who ever touched this case. The real case ended in a lenient plea and a work release schedule. Batman doesn't cut deals. It is the entire difference between him and the system that failed. He doesn't offer a lesser charge. He doesn't offer a quiet plea. He offers the one thing this case never had, an investigator who cannot be talked down. And that's the move, where a solved case stops staying unfinished, not with a punch, with the simple fact that this time there's no deal on the table and no one. Move 5. This is the one that should genuinely scare the people at the top. The real playbook has a fallback for exactly this moment. When a scandal gets too big to bury, the system goes looking for someone lower down to hang it on, someone expendable, and the story closes and the questions stop. Batman does not take the scapegoat. He spent his entire career refusing the easy collar and the convenient story that closes a case while protecting the wrong people. He works a pyramid upward, never downward, and a man with unlimited resources and no boss is the one investigator who can afford to keep climbing past the exact point where everyone else got told to stop. That's the whole difference. The real case climbed until it got expensive and then it stopped. Batman does not have an expensive. And then Batman hits the wall. The one I promised you in the first 30 seconds. Here's what Batman can absolutely do. He can seize the money. He can free the island. He can put the operation, the physical, criminal operation, in a cage by Sunday night. Exactly like I told you, that's easy, almost embarrassingly easy. But that was never the hard part of this case. The crime is never the hard part. The protection was a non-prosecution deal that made a federal case disappear. One state charge where there should have been a stack. Victims kept in the dark until a judge ruled it broke the law. That is the machine that kept an unsolved case unfinished for 13 years. And that is not a fistfight. You cannot punch a plea deal. You cannot bench press your way through a legal system that already decided nope, not to fight. Unwinding paperwork, institutional inertia is a completely different kind of war. And Batman, for all of him that he is, he's still a hammer. A rich hammer, but still a hammer. And this is not a nail. It needs a detective who can fight on that terrain. Information, misdirection, patience. Someone who never gets up from the chair and still takes the whole thing apart from the inside. It needs L. 3 of the world's greatest detectives operating under one identity. He closed thousands of cases without getting out of the chair purely by making the guilty flinch. The detective who once cracked a serial killer cipher the FBI called unsolvable in about the time it takes you to make coffee. His entire method is turning a target's own secrecy into the trap that closes on it. Batman catches the man, and L is the only one who can catch what protected him. So, could Batman catch Jeffrey Epstein? Yeah, in a weekend, because catching Epstein was never the hard part. Everyone caught Epstein. The system just kept letting him go. And this is exactly the kind of case L was built for. A crime everybody already solved. A verdict everyone thinks they already know. And an outcome decided by everything except the evidence. And there's one trial in American history that fits that description better than any other. The one people still argue about at dinner. The one where the entire country watched the case get won, so the next file on L's desk isn't Epstein. It's a white Bronco, a glove that didn't fit, and the most watched verdict of all time. Could L catch O.J. Simpson?